Good morning and welcome to the Music Licensing 101 webinar. I'm Sean Lyons, Executive Director of the South Dakota Retailers Association. Today's program will feature a presentation by Dan Spears, who is the Vice President of Industry Relations and Licensing at Broadcast Music Incorporated. Dan works closely with BMI's licensing management team to create strategic, value-driven sponsorships and customer events. He serves as the pivotal bridge between the company's licensing, writer, publisher, and business affairs teams. SDRA has an agreement with BMI that provides our retail, restaurant, and bar members with discounts on music licensing services through BMI. Dan is our key point person that we work with on that service. A couple of notes before we start the presentation. First, the phones of all attendees are muted, so we won't be hearing background noises. Second, we'll have a question and answer period at the conclusion of the presentation. If you would like to ask a question at any time, just go to the panel on the right side of your screen. You may click on the orange arrow to maximize the panel. Where it says type message here, type in your question and click on send. At the conclusion of the presentation, I'll read the questions out loud, and Dan will provide the answers. Now, we'll turn the presentation over to Dan Spears. Dan, good morning.
Good morning, Sean, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to your group. We value our relationship with the SDRA, and you're great partners, and I hope that the next few minutes we'll have a chance to educate your membership, and I'll try and make this as interesting as possible. It's perhaps not everybody's favorite subject matter. I understand that. I'm a realist. I know that music licensing can be a daunting subject matter and sometimes not a pleasant one, so I'm going to try and shed as much light as I can on it. I want to also make it clear this is not going to be a BMI infomercial. There is, of course, a little branding on the PowerPoint that our marketing folks like to put up there, but I truly am going to talk about music licensing as a category and not necessarily focus on BMI per se. Certainly BMI will be part of the conversation in the context of talking about public performance rights. But I really hope that during this presentation you'll see it as a safe harbor to ask any question that you would like. This is not a sales pitch. This is not me trying to find out who's using music in South Dakota without a license. This is strictly about creating an opportunity for you to learn more about music licensing and how it might affect your business. So what I'm going to talk about over the next, half hour, 40 minutes, whatever it takes, we're going to cover copyright basics because really that's what this is all based upon. We're going to talk about what's a performance, a public performance, what qualifies for that, what requires a license agreement. We, of course, will spend a little bit of time talking about BMI, not so much about our award-winning catalog. But I really want to focus on where the money goes because that's a huge issue. A lot of people that license with BMI and pay fees don't quite understand where the money goes. They know it's a copyright thing. They feel like if they don't sign a license, they'll be sued for infringement. And yes, of course, there is a federal law involved here, but I also want to talk about how much our songwriters and all organizations, songwriters, rely on the licensing fees that you pay to help make a living and write songs that hopefully will make your businesses more successful. We'll talk a little bit specifically about our license agreements and what they entail. And then, as Sean mentioned, we do have great partnerships with the South Dakota Restaurant Associations for discounts for retail and restaurant association members, and we'll get a little bit into that. Copyright. I think most of us understand that it's truly about intellectual property, not only music, but literary, dramatic, artistic, anything that really involves an original authorship. But in the case of our conversation today, we're really talking about music. One of the things that people often ask me about is, well, when is a song no longer licensable? When does a song go into the public domain so that I don't have to worry about getting that music cleared? And right now, the copyright law, due to some revisions made a few years ago, The copyright now lasts for 70 years after the death of an owner of that intellectual property. In the case of music, we're talking about the songwriter, the composer. So, John Lennon, obviously in the case of Prince recently, the copyright lives for 70 years after their death, and so the estate benefits from any fees that might be captured as a result of a copyright of a particular song. And like a lot of property, intellectual property is no different than physical property in that it can't be used without getting the permission from the owner. We're specifically talking about public performance rights today because that's the right that kicks in when you publicly perform or use music in your businesses. But I think it's important to kind of talk about it in the context of other rights that exist under the copyright law. Some of them, as they relate to music, may not necessarily connect with what you're doing in your business, but I think it's worth talking about just to kind of give you a broad scope of the music copyrights that exist. The first one is mechanical, and that is the right that is owned by the songwriter and the publisher when a CD, which doesn't happen very often these days, is sold or a digital download takes place, a purchase of a single or an album through iTunes. There is a mechanical right that kicks in that is owned by the songwriter and publisher, which requires them to be paid 9.1 cents per song that is downloaded or sold physically through a CD or even vinyl these days. As you know, physical product is not sold very much. A lot of people aren't buying CDs and albums. Most of them are streaming, so that revenue stream is kind of dried up for the songwriter and publisher, but it still exists. Synchronization rights, that is the right also held by the publisher of a song and a songwriter as well. That's when someone wants to use a popular piece of music in a television show, movie, maybe a local advertisement through radio or television. That requires the user of that song or the music supervisor, when it comes to TV or film, to go to the publisher and negotiate a synchronization right for the underlying words and music. So that's just for the words and music of the song. If they want to use that song in its original form and the original recording, they must go to the record label. So for example, if I want to use Fun, Fun, Fun by the Beach Boys in a Ford dealer commercial I'm doing on my television station, I need to get not only the publisher of Fun, 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 which is the copyright owner of that song, I need to get them to give me permission, and we need to negotiate a fee. But I also have to go to the record label that put out the Beach Boys album and get their permission to use the original recording. Another right that has recently been given to the record labels and the artists, and this dates back to the late 1990s when the digital age arrived. Congress passed the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, which revised the copyright law, and they did it because it's so easy to, and Napster showed it, but it's so easy in the digital age to kind of capture copy a song through a stream or an MP3 or what have you. And so they decided that the artist and label should get a fee whenever a song is streamed digitally. This does not mean that the artist gets compensated when a song is played on your local over-the-air radio station, but it only applies to Spotify or Pandora, or if your radio station is streaming, which many of them do, the artist and the label get a fee for that. Not necessarily important for many of you in terms of your businesses, but I just thought it would be interesting to mention. The final right, which is the right that is near and dear to my heart, and certainly the right that would exist in your business, a right that you'd have to pay attention to if you're using music in your establishment, that's the public performance right. And that is the right that is afforded the songwriter and publisher when their music is publicly performed, which means aired on a radio station, on a television station, streamed on the internet, played in a bar or restaurant, a hotel, an aerobics studio, a bowling alley, a fitness class. All of those are considered public performance, and it's not too dissimilar from when you buy a DVD and you see that when you turn it on and watch it, you see that little message at the bottom that says you must get permission if you're going to publicly show this movie. It's the same concept. You can buy a CD, you can have a live band performing, but in order to have it publicly perform in a public environment, you need permission from the songwriter and publisher. This is really the main source of income for a songwriter. And it's really what is the reason why BMI exists and the other performing rights organizations. Private use we'll get into in a second what that means. Performance in public is a place where a substantial number of people outside your family can access the music. So if you have a wedding or you're doing a small house party with a bunch of your friends and you're playing music, or you have a live band at the wedding, that's not considered a public performance of music under the copyright law and would not be licensable. So who are the organizations that help enforce, for lack of a better word, although I don't love that word, the public performance right on behalf of their songwriters and publishers? There's BMI, there's ASCAP, there's CSAC, and there's this new player that's on the scene that many of you may have not heard of, which I'll talk about in a minute, called Global Music Rights. Just a little history so you understand kind of the background on these companies. ASCAP was the very first organization in the 1900s that helped collect public performance royalties on behalf of songwriters and publishers. Going back to 1939, they were the only game in town. They were a monopoly, and as a result, their fees were extraordinarily high. The industry that was primarily having to do business with ASCAP was the radio industry, and they were seeing their fees be increased by 100% on a yearly basis. The other thing that was going on was that ASCAP had a very strict policy. They're a membership-based society. They operate in a not-for-profit fashion. But during 1939 and previous years, in order to join ASCAP, you had to have at least 2 established hits on the radio. And ASCAP at the time, their catalog was very traditional in nature, the George Gershwin, Stephen Fosters of the world. Radio, as a result, mirrored that catalog, because if you were a up-and-coming writer of R&B music, which was referred to as race music, or hillbilly music, which of course became country, it was kind of a catch-22 for you. You couldn't get your music on the radio because the radio stations wouldn't play it because there was no copyright compliance mechanism, and ASCAP would not allow you to affiliate with their organization because you didn't have 2 established hits on the radio. So basically you were stuck. So the broadcasters got together to create BMI, and they did it as a way to bring the rates down, create a competitive music source, but also open the doors to new forms of music. So all these, quote, hillbilly songwriters and race music songwriters could join BMI. Their music was now it was now protected through an organization, a performing rights organization, such that radio stations could take licenses out and play that music. And so often BMI is referred to as a company that helped bring about the explosion of new music in the U.S. because they supported rock and roll, country, and R&B during the infancies of those genres. So that's how BMI was created. BMI is owned by the broadcasting industry, and stock is still held by the originating companies, but is a not-for-profit company. There is no dividend paid at the end of the year to any stockholder. There is no venture capital firm that requires any payback on any loans. BMI is 100% operating in a not-for-profit fashion, as is ASCAP, because they're a society. CSAC is a whole different ballgame. They're a small, privately held company funded through a venture capital firm. They're for-profit 100%, and they tend to behave as a company that's trying to make a profit. I'll maybe get into a little bit more on CSAC because I know some of you may get approached by CSAC from time to time. BMI and ASCAP represent probably 98% of the music on the radio today, pretty much split 50-50 between the two organizations. CSAC has a couple of percentage points, and and GMR, which is a brand new company that many of you have probably not been exposed to, but you might. It was started by Irving Azoff, who, for many of you who are knowledgeable about the music industry, he was the Eagles' longtime manager. He's been in the business for a great while. He created GMR because he thought he could create more value for his songwriters, get frankly more money for them. So he brought a few major acts over from other performing rights organizations. Bruce Springsteen came in from ASCAP, and he has the Eagles as well. So he's got 4 or 5 high-profile songwriters, and he's now trying to go after businesses to try and get them to license those catalogs. And it's confusing to restaurants and bars because they're like, who is this 4th new player? We thought it was just BMI, ASCAP, and CSAC. So I mention that now because I think it's going to probably come on your radar screen at some point. We'll get back a little bit into ASCAP, BMI, and CSAC if we have some time at the end. I'll give you some more insight into kind of how we do business and what dictates our license agreements and our fee structure. But I want to spend some time just talking about what public performance of music includes. I referenced it earlier, but for the purposes of your business, if you have live entertainment, if you have a cover band on a Saturday night, or you have a singer-songwriter playing songs Wednesday and Thursdays, or you have a DJ coming in, or you've got a dance club environment on Saturdays, those are all considered public performance of music and would require a license agreement. Jukeboxes are already licensed before they come into your establishment, so that's not your responsibility. As are commercial music services. They are already licensed before they even send their first signal into your establishment. They've got agreements with BMI and ASCAP and CSAC, and that, of course, is part of their sort of sales pitch that when they come to you and say, hey, this is something that we've taken care of for you. It's not your responsibility, and so you can play as much or as little of your commercial music service and not be worried about having to pay BMI, ASCAP, or CSAC. If you're doing the CDs on your own, you're programming your own music, you're streaming a service like Spotify or Pandora without a business license, then you would need to contact the performing rights organizations directly and license with them. But if you've got a Pandora for business, then you're covered and it's not your responsibility. And as I said, on top of that, if you're doing commercial music service music, but you also have live music and you also have karaoke and you also have a DJ and dancing, then you would need a BMI license or an ASCAP license on top of that. One of the questions that's often asked of me that's very confusing to most business owners is the concept of audio on television sets. So many of you may have been contacted by BMI or ASCAP or CSAC about television sets in your establishment. Let's say you're a sports bar and you've got 10 television sets. You've got a commercial music service, so you're covered there, but you've got 10 television sets that you turn the audio up very high during hockey season or football season, and it creates a fun sports environment in your business. Under the copyright law, again, this is not a BMI or ASCAP rule. This is something that the copyright law says, is that the audio that comes out of that television set needs to be licensed by the entity from which it comes from. Some people have said, well, why isn't DirecTV or Comcast responsible for that? If I pay them a business license, why have they not paid for it? That's just the way the copyright law is. It's the same concept as why doesn't the live band, the cover band that's playing, Eagles cover music, why aren't they responsible for paying those licensing fees? It's just how the law was originally. They felt that if it was the business that was generating revenue off of that music and the atmosphere that it created, that the Congress felt very strongly that it should be the responsibility of the business owner. So when you've got television sets and audio on, and there's music in that audio, whether it's halftime music or music in commercials, it is the responsibility of the business, and it's actually in the copyright law, and it's in some of the brochures and material that we distribute to the association. So if you have questions about that, because there are some exemptions, there are some rules and regulations that specifically talk about how many TV sets you need to have and how many rooms. And I'm not talking about private rooms like a hotel room. This is strictly, again, in a public space. So that's something that I wanted to spend a few minutes on, because a lot of people are confused by it and a little baffled. So the role that performing rights organizations play is they're the middle person between those that write music and those that use the music. And what BMI and ASCAP and CSAC have tried to do is create these blanket licenses that allow you to access all the songs in a PRO's repertoire, performing rights organizations, what they call us, for one flat fee. And the reason for that is that it then takes the responsibility away from you for having to contact every single publisher of every single song that you're using and try and negotiate a rate and gain their permission to publicly perform that music. Because if BMI didn't exist, or ASCAP didn't exist, or CSAC for that matter, you'd have to do it all yourself. So we kind of serve as a clearinghouse, as a middle person, to make that process easier for you. And I know that a lot of folks, because they've never lived in a world without the PROs, don't necessarily appreciate that, and I understand, I do. But sometimes businesses get frustrated by the process, and I think they get angry at BMI and ASCAP, and I know sometimes, in an effort to protect the rights of our songwriters, you may feel that we're being a little too aggressive, which is not the way we should conduct ourselves. But if at times that happens, it's not what we're trying to do in getting these licensing fees for our songwriters is something that we're not doing because we've created this business for BMI. It's strictly the copyright law that has dictated that we exist for our songwriters. So another big question that occurs is, well, why are there 3 PROs, and can I choose one or the other? And this is a really sticky, difficult subject matter, because BMI, my company, does compete with ASCAP and CSAC. And so, but on the other hand, they also do what we do. They want to, protect the rights of their songwriters who create intellectual property and they're entitled to being paid for writing music. The problem is that people will say, companies, establishments, businesses will say, well, can I have a BMI agreement and not an ASCAP agreement? Can I just have one? And it's possible, but it's very difficult, because if you're trying to appeal to a diverse group of patrons, you want to play all music, you want to be able to access contemporary music, classic rock, whatever it is that fits the clientele that you're trying to attract. It's hard to have someone whose job is to simply pull out ASCAP or BMI songs out of your rotation or off of your band's set list, because frankly the cost to you of hiring somebody whose job is to just try and keep one particular performing rights organization's catalog out of the mix could probably cost you as much as the license or more that you'd be getting if you just entered into agreements with all the performing arts organizations. CSAC, I will say, is a much smaller percentage with some high-profile artists. It is possible. I've seen it done to try and remove CSAC music, but it needs to be monitored, because they clearly have Bob Dylan, Neil Diamond. They brought those guys over to CSAC a number of years ago for a lot of money to try and create some high-profile visibility. So they do have some songwriters that you are playing, or many businesses are playing. They've added some recently, Mariah Carey and some others. So it's very difficult to avoid playing CSAC music. But I've come across some radio stations that have managed to pull that music out of their catalog, but it's not easy. CSAC does now have their repertoire up online that you can access, as do BMI and ASCAP. But the catalog information changes so frequently because you'll get songwriters that are changing from one performing rights organization to another. You'll have songs that are co-written by both PROs, by songwriters with both PROs, or maybe songwriters that are with, there's 3 PROs that are involved. A songwriter can only join one, but they collaborate so much that there might be, Dan might be a BMI songwriter, Sean might be an ASCAP songwriter, and Donna might be a CSAC songwriter, and they all 3 write a song together. So it's hard. It's a sticky question for me because I feel sometimes uncomfortable advising people about this because in the end, if I say, oh yeah, you could probably try and remove this music, if, for example, they aren't able to do that completely, then they are opening themselves up for copyright infringement. The best thing I can tell you is that the reason why there are 3 performing rights organizations and there's a 4th one coming is to create competition in the marketplace and keep the rates affordable for you all, based upon the history. I talked a little bit about this already. What's the benefit of a public performance license for hotels and restaurants and retails and bars? It gives you a lot of flexibility and gives you blanket access to an entire catalog. I think that it is important for you to know that BMI and ASCAP operate under Justice Department consent decrees that were created in the 1960s for antitrust reasons, because there's just a few players in the space. The Justice Department was concerned about how we did business. So they created a consent decree, and one of the very specific elements in that consent decree that we must live by is that we have to treat similarly situated businesses in a similar fashion. What that means is that the rate that Joe's Bar and Grill in Rapid City pays BMI has to be the same rate that that someone who's in Pierre, South Dakota is paying. And it's something we have to live by in every single category of industry that we license. We cannot negotiate fees. We have to create one formula for determining fees and stick to it. That's true for ASCAP and BMI. So if you, in other words, if you got a phone call from an ASCAP or a BMI rep and you said, hey, I'm asking if you could lower my rate or whatever, we would actually be prohibited by law from doing that, because then we'd have to offer that same rate to the rest of the industry. CSAC, on the other hand, they are a for-profit company that currently does not operate under a consent decree. There's been a lot of there's been a huge push, particularly in the radio and TV industry, to get the Justice Department to create a consent decree for them because they've been frustrated with CSAC's fairly aggressive behavior out in the marketplace, and they feel like CSAC should be under a consent decree, but for now they aren't. And the advantage, I guess, to you would be you can negotiate fees with them. Now, how willing and how receptive they will be, I don't know, but there's no law that prohibits them from doing a specific deal just with you. For example, if you have multi-locations and you don't feel like the rate is fair. I will say this, and CSAC has the right to exist, and you have to do business with them because they do have a catalog and they're doing what we do. They're protecting intellectual property. However, their catalog is much smaller than ASCAP and BMI. So if you're paying BMI $350 a year and you're paying ASCAP $350 a year, and CSAC comes to you and says, well, I think your license is going to cost $250 a year, then I think that's a point that you could negotiate and say, I understand your right to exist. I want to pay you. I want to pay your songwriters, but I want it to be commensurate with the music that I'm using, and I'm paying BMI and ASCAP $350 a year, and I know their catalog is much larger than yours. And I would take that same approach if and when you're approached by GMR. Their catalog is much, much smaller, and if they ask you for a rate that's similar to what you're paying BMI and ASCAP, I think you are fully within your rights to negotiate a rate that you think is more commensurate with the kind of music that you're using. So that's the best business advice that I can give you about that. I know it's not a question that's come up, but it might, and I just want to mention that to you. Our partnership is strong with South Dakota Retail Association. Sean has been a wonderful partner, as his entire staff. We advocate for one another. We do the best that we can to help sell the association membership when we're out there talking to the bars and restaurants and retail establishments in the state. and they're helping us provide education to their members about music licensing. There's a business advantage that when you are a member of the South Dakota Restaurant Association as a restaurant and bar, you can experience up to a 20% discount in your fees. If you're a retail establishment, thanks to an agreement that we recently reached, we now have a retail discount program that is a 10% discount. So both provide great opportunities to experience some savings, and so it's something that if you've not seen reflected in your bill, or you're not a member yet and you're going to be a member, it's something certainly to keep in mind. I think finally, and I just want to take a few minutes to talk about this, and if we have any questions, we can move on to that. But this is really important, and I've mentioned this a little bit at the outset, but it's really hard to communicate this enough, and that is that when you pay BMI, 88 cents of every dollar that you're paying is coming back to the songwriters. So we're not a for-profit company. I mentioned this earlier, but I think it's important to mention again. We're simply a middle person in collecting those fees on behalf of our writers. We have about a 12% overhead, and that's why it's not 100% of what you pay, but it's 88 cents on a dollar, which I think is pretty good compared to other companies that operate in a non-profit way. And I think what I'll leave you with on this subject is that, yes, it's a copyright compliance thing. It certainly is. Federal law dictates that you must compensate songwriters and publishers when you publicly perform their music. But I would love it if you would look at it in this way, and that is you're part of the ecosystem in the music industry that allows these writers to continue to write music. Because, again, if it weren't for the fees that you pay, these guys wouldn't be able to write songs that hopefully make your businesses successful, create ambiance, and help you with your food and beverage or your retail sales. You're helping fuel the creative process with the fees that you pay. And then normally when I'm doing an event or involved with an association, I love to bring out one of our songwriters, and maybe someday we'll, Sean and I have talked about doing that in South Dakota, because I think that humanizes it a little bit and will help you understand who the beneficiaries are. And most of the folks that are beneficiaries, you've never heard of them. Yeah, I've got all these pictures here with Ricky Martin and Sheryl Crow, and yes, they are BMI songwriters, but I would say, 80% of BMI songwriters you've never heard of, because most of the music that's on the radio today or played in your establishments was not written by the artist who's performing it, but by a songwriter that's behind the scenes that does nothing but write music for a living. Does not perform, does not make money on record sales or concert tours or merchandise. They rely 100% on the public performance royalties. So this is my opportunity for those that are here on the phone or listening to this on a recording. On behalf of BMI and our songwriters and publishers, thank you to the South Dakota restaurants, bars, retail establishments for supporting our songwriters, allowing them to do what they love to do best, to write music for you that hopefully will help your businesses succeed. So with that, that's my presentation. I would love to hand it back over to Sean and see if you've got any questions that I can address.
Thanks, Dan, I do. And before I get to those, I want to remind everybody once again that if you have a question, just go to that panel on the right side of your screen. You may click on the orange arrow to maximize the panel where it says type the message here, type in your message, and then click on send, and I'll try to go through those with Dan. Dan, I think probably the first thing, and I know BMI's relationship has been in the past primarily just with state restaurant associations. I need to clarify something that you said for everybody on the call, because I think there's probably going to be a little confusion. We are the South Dakota Retailers Association, and under our umbrella we have the restaurants as part of our membership. In fact, we merged with the Restaurant Association probably 20 years ago. So I know there was a question out there, who is the South Dakota Restaurant Association? That's us. So I just want to make sure that we clarify that for everybody. And Dan, I know you're aware of that as well. Let me go through some of the questions then that have been submitted. First one is, and Dan, if some of these are repetitive, again, folks will submit these, and it might be just good a refresher to go back. The first question is, are some businesses exempt from paying music license fees due to the size of the business?
Yeah, absolutely. There is a square footage exemption if you're using an over-the-air radio as your sole source of music. So this was part of, there was a Fairness in Music Licensing Copyright Act that was a number of years ago that was implemented by Congress, and one of the things that came out of that was an exemption, square footage exemption for businesses that were using the radio, playing the radio. It does not apply to if you're using CDs or whatever, but there is a square footage exemption for the smaller businesses that are playing the radio, and if that happens to be you, you have a radio that you air and you want to know whether you're exempt from licensing fees, then I would reach out to the association, who can in turn reach out to me if they don't have that information. The copyright law specifically states what that exemption is, rather than go through the whole legalese of it. Suffice to say, it has to do with square footage. I think it's less than, what is it, 3,000 or 4,000 square feet, but we can get that information out.
Dan, are businesses that sell music exempt from paying the music license fees? For example, if a store sells CDs and they play CDs over the speaker system, are they exempt?
Yes, they are, and I should have mentioned that as well. Yes, if you're playing CDs as a marketing tool to sell the product that you have in your store, like if you're, God bless some of these vinyl stores that are still around, the record stores that still exist, and they're playing records in there, they are exempt from fees. You are correct.
Dan, this question asks, I work at a dentist's office, and we've heard that medical facilities don't have to pay music licensing fees. Is that true?
Not that I'm aware of. I've never heard that before. No. It just depends on how the music is being used. If it's, there are, and I should mention that a lot of the exemptions, I guess I didn't cover the entire realm of what could be exempt, but if you, for example, have a home-style boombox that you've got in your dentist office, and it's sitting behind the desk, and you're kind of playing it primarily for your employees, but it kind of wafts out into the waiting room, that's a home-style exemption, which means you were not intent on publicly performing music, but this sort of happens to come into the public space. In a dentist's office, if you've got 10 speakers that you've got up there and you're playing music in the common area that you're programming yourself, some digital, downloads or what have you, then that is licensable. As a retail establishment, you would need an agreement to do that. So any kind of medical company exemption I am not aware of.
Once a year, I have a big outdoor customer appreciation event where I provide a free meal to anyone who wants to attend. I usually invite a local group to play music. Sometimes it's high school kids, sometimes it's other people. I don't pay them. It's just a chance for exposure for them. If I don't pay them, do I have to pay music licensing fees?
Well, under the letter of the law, you technically would need a license. It's a special festival event license. Sounds to me it's like a charity event where you're not charging anything, and the money is kind of, or the event is in support of less fortunate people or whatever. I'm not sure, but there's an agreement that exists with BMI. I'm sure ASCAP has a similar one. It's very inexpensive. It's available on our website, that would cover an event like that, where you don't have any entertainment expenses, you're not trying to make any money, you're not selling any tickets. So under the letter of the law, yeah, technically you need a license for that. If you want to, quote, do the right thing, then you would take an agreement out for that. But it's not very expensive. It's priced in a way that that jibes with the purpose of the event.
Dan, before I go on to the next question, could you just go back to your slide? I think it would be helpful for some folks, your contact information at BMI or the website where they might be able to get additional information.
Yeah, oops, I should have left have left the slide on that. Left it on that side.
Okay. Next question I have has been submitted. I have the local radio station playing over the speakers in my business. I know some businesses have the local radio station playing on their phone system when they have people on hold. Do we have to pay the BMI and ASCAP fees for that?
So the music on hold, yes, there is a license agreement for music on hold. It's not very expensive, but it does exist, and that technically requires an agreement. As for the radio, the local radio station playing in the business, that goes back to the exemption that exists potentially for you under the copyright law. When local radio is played in an establishment that's relatively small in square footage, an agreement would not be required. I should know this because I've been with BMI for a long time, but I don't have the exact number in front of my eyes. It's like 4,000. I want to say 3,000 or 4,000 square feet, like 3,500 square feet or less. And you play a local radio in your business, you don't need to license it. But if it's a large business with a bunch of speakers and you're bringing a local radio station into your business, it does require a license. And a lot of people ask that question, like, why do I need a license if the radio station itself already has one? Well, the copyright law recognizes that rebroadcast, that transmitting it into a public space at your business. They consider that a second performance. So when a radio station pays licensing fees to BMI, which they do, they pay for the performance, the public performance of music coming out of their, out of their transmitter. But as soon as it comes then out of your speakers, the Congress and the copyright law dictate that you need a license because it's considered a second performance.
And maybe, Dan, it might be something just to make note of, and if you can find that information, just get it sent to us, and we'll make sure we have that.
I will send it to you. I will send it to you right after our call.
That sounds great. Next question. I own a retail business. My family is also planning to open a daycare center, and we were thinking of having a movie time every day where we'd run some DVDs for the kids, such as Disney movies. Do we need to be licensed to play movies for kids at a daycare center?
Well, let me preface this by saying I am definitely not a lawyer. So any advice or information I give you with regards to that question is just my opinion based upon working in the industry for a long time. My feeling is that would not be necessarily it's not necessarily a public performance if you're doing it specifically for the kids in the program. Much like if to use a broader based example, if I'm in a high school class and they show a movie during class, they read the book Old Yeller, and then they show the actual movie version and they spend time talking about the difference. That's not, under the copyright law, in my opinion, considered a public performance because it's being done in a small educational environment that the entire public can't gain access to. So that's just my opinion. I'm not a lawyer, but I would think that you would not need permission to play those Disney movies in that small daycare center. Now, if you had a big fundraiser for the daycare center and you projected a movie out in the parking lot and people came in and you charged $5 to come in and watch the movie, and it was a way to raise money for the daycare, then that would be considered a public performance and would require permission from the movie company.
Dan, this next question asks, I operate a motel and have one TV set in the room where we serve complimentary breakfast to our guests. It's the only TV we have in a public area. We don't play music over a speaker system. Do we have to be licensed for that one TV?
I think you're okay. That's another exemption issue that I discussed earlier. There is a specific amount of TVs and a specific screen size that the copyright law says that requires a license agreement, and a lot of that information I should be on some of the one sheets the association has. I will forward that if you don't have it, Sean. But one television set in a breakfast area, it depends upon the size of the screen. My initial inclination is to say that I don't think that's licensable, but along with that information about the square footage for playing a radio, we can certainly get that, Sean. You can publish it. But the ones that really require a license agreement from a hotel standpoint are some of the franchisees like the Hilton Garden Inn and such, where they've got 3 or 4 TV sets in a common area with a big screen, but a small television set and a small breakfast nook and a little in a smaller motel. My immediate inclination is to say that it doesn't require a license, but we'll get out the rules and regs specifically so that you all can look at them and see if they match your situation.
Next question. Sorry if you already talked about this. I missed part of the program. Are there discounts for businesses with multiple locations? Maybe you can go over that again, Dan.
No, we didn't talk about that, and yes, there are. We do give a discount for an operator that has, I think in retail it's like 7 or more. It might be the same in restaurant, but yeah, it's like anything, I guess. You know, you order 100 T-shirts, it's less expensive than if you order 10. I think the BMI agreements take into consideration that same concept. That and you need to make sure that we're aware of it. If you've licensed 10 different entities separately with us and we don't know that they're all connected together under the same roof, same ownership, same umbrella, you need to let us know, because yes, the fee does go down if you have a large amount of properties.
Dan, this question asks, just to be clear, if I have a radio station playing in my retail business, I do not have to do anything with copyright?
No, this goes back again. You do if your business is a certain square footage or more. A number of years ago, the National Restaurant Association lobbied Congress and got a revision to the copyright law through called the Fairness in Music Licensing Act. Back in the 90s, any business that had an over-the-air radio station that was being piped into their business required a license agreement. And the NRA lobbied Congress so that they changed the law so there is an exemption for small businesses that are airing over-the-air local radio stations. And again, I should know this, but I'm getting old. The actual square footage number escapes me. It's, like I said, I'm repeating myself, but I think it's in the 3,000 or 4,000 square footage range. I'll get that information out because clearly it's a subject matter that's of interest to a lot of the folks who've tuned in today.
Yeah, it clearly is, and SDRA will email information on the square footage exemption to everyone who attended today's webinar. This goes back to that again as well. Why square footage and not amount of business? Square footage doesn't necessarily convert to amount of business.
Well, when you say amount of business, obviously it's a written question, so I don't know if, Sean, you can help clarify. But when you say amount of business, are they talking about revenue?
I'm trying to interpret somebody's question. I guess that would be the only assumption that I could make, and if the individual who asked this, they want to clarify that, please go ahead and resubmit.
Well, I mean, what I can tell you, and we get this question a lot from and I don't know if this is a restaurant or a retail, I mean, the square footage question about why did Congress or decide that square footage would be what was connected to the exemption for radio station being aired. I don't necessarily know that I can give you what their mindset was. I can tell you that over the years, in the way that we've created fees for restaurants and bars and retail for that matter, is that we've not gone the direction of revenue, if that's what you're referring to, because then that gets us in the business of auditing, because when you do something like this, in order to protect the integrity of the formula that you determine fees, you've got to go and you've got to determine are people reporting their revenue properly, and then that means we got to go into your business and look at your books and I know you probably wouldn't like that. So over the years, at least for example with restaurants and bars, we've used occupancy numbers because that's verifiable as a fire code number. And we found that that's the easiest, most, the least intrusive way and the fairest way to see restaurant and bars is based upon that number. Why Congress decided that they would create an exemption for a retail establishment under a certain square footage versus something else, I'm not sure, but I'm pretty sure that they wouldn't want to get in the business of having to ask businesses how much revenue they're generating to determine an exemption.
Yeah, and I would think we would generally agree with that as well. It sounds like we've got to follow up that amount of business equals the volume of business. That was the clarification. Next, go ahead. Dan.
No, go ahead. I not being in the retail business, I don't know if volume of business would equate to the revenue number. I don't know. Does that mean volume of business mean the amount of people that are actually in the store on a daily basis? Is that volume of business? I don't know. I do know that in this case, the square footage number is something that's easily provided and verifiable, as opposed to if you're trying to generate information on amount of business, whether that means how many people came in the store that day or how much was sold in retail revenue that day. I think those are numbers that are very difficult to come up with accurate information that everybody agrees on, whereas square footage is pretty black and white.
Yeah, I would think, and again, some may not agree with this statement, but I would think there would be some sensitivity providing that type of information to a non-governmental entity. I want to move on to the next question that's been submitted, Dan. So to be completely compliant, do we need to pay licensing fees to all the organizations, all the pros?
Well, this kind of goes back to I guess in the middle of my presentation, I said, look, this is kind of a sticky subject because ASCAP and CSAC are competitors of BMI, meaning we both compete to sign up the best songwriters so we can represent their catalog. When it comes to the licensing of businesses, I guess the safe thing for me to say would be in a public forum like this, if you want to play music from a BMI catalog, you need a BMI license, and I could end it at that. But I'm trying to be measured in my response where I'm giving you good business advice, and I'm not, definitely not making disparaging comments about our competitors in this space. For me to tell you that, to just all you need is a BMI license, just play BMI music, would be accurate but probably not realistic, because in order to, if you've got a cover band that comes in on Saturday nights, and in order for you to monitor their playlist and determine what they're playing and manage that process, it would be very difficult to avoid playing ASCAP's music, for example, because the numbers just dictate that. BMI and ASCAP represent approximately 98% of the music that's out there. So to eliminate ASCAP and not have an agreement with them is difficult. CSAC has some pretty high-profile artists, so to completely eliminate them would take some work. You'd have to really become somewhat of a student of their catalog and remove them from the equation. Hard to do, as I said before. So my long-winded answer, made into a short summary would be, if you're trying to play, have no restrictions on any kind of music, meaning you can play contemporary, class, any kind of music, any sort of artist or any genre, without worrying a thing about infringing upon copyright, then you would most likely want to have a conversation with all the people about entering into agreements with them. It's not I'm not telling you have to, but I'm telling you that it's very difficult to not have agreements with all of them when you're trying to run a business, and whether you're selling beer or hamburgers, it's pretty hard to at the same time manage the music piece and figure out what's being played and what isn't. And it's a hard subject matter because, again, I understand. This is one thing I've learned over the years in working and with the industries that you all are in. You guys get bombarded on a daily basis from credit card companies. They're trying to sell you this or that, or someone's trying to sell you a new system for your a new tap for your beers and whatever it is that they're trying to sell you. And at the same time, you've got 3 performing rights organizations, now possibly 4, calling you. I understand that that's a challenge, and I know that it's not easy, and many people have said, why can't we just have one? Well, all I can say from a business perspective is that we did have one a long time ago, and it results in probably higher fees than you'd be paying right now with having 4 or 3. So, yeah, that's the best way I can do it, Sean. It's hard because we've had this conversation multiple times with restaurateurs and others that say, hey, I just want to play BMI music. I mean, it's possible if you want to just play, for example, 20 songs on a loop and not worry about what's playing on the radio today, you could actually manage that, oversee that, and figure that out. Say, I'm only going to play these 20 songs that I know are BMI. I'm just going to have a BMI license. But then as soon as the next singer-songwriter or cover band comes in and starts playing stuff that's not on that 20-song set list, then all of a sudden you're like, uh-oh, I'm in trouble here because I don't have an agreement to cover that.
Yeah, and certainly appreciate the clarification. And I think, it's a daunting issue that a lot of our members, and we are a diverse organization, just have questions about it. In this particular case, the amount of business, we have, for example, fraternal organizations that are associate members of ours, and business may have dropped over the years, so that's maybe why the question's being asked, and I don't know that we need to get any further information on that, and obviously we can kind of act as a conduit between BMI and those asking the questions. But just the explanation on revenue versus footage, I think, is helpful, Dan, to just kind of put in perspective. So appreciate that.
Yep.
Let's go to the next question, and we'll start wrapping things up, folks, here soon. So if you have additional questions, please feel free to submit them. Obviously, our arrangement and agreement with BMI, Dan, has been, I think it's frankly, we're about a year, not even quite into this, if I'm not mistaken. And bringing on the retail piece, for example, just happened within the last 30 days or so. Does our agreement, and maybe you can explain this, does that discount apply to hotels and bars or just to restaurants on that side of the spectrum? Not on the retail, but just in this case. We do have a number of hotels and bars that are members of the association. Can you just explain that discount? And maybe before you do that, and think about maybe what the future is of this discount program. I think the fact that now SDRA is pioneering the retail discounts is something, frankly, new to a lot of our counterparts around the country. So maybe you can explain on that.
Sure. So the agreement that we have with the restaurant portion of your membership, it really relates to our license agreement called the eating. It's called our EDE license, the Eating and Drinking Establishments license. So it would apply to all restaurants and bars that are members of the South Dakota Restaurant Association. And the way that the discount program works is that you get a 5% discount for being a member of the South Dakota Retail Association, 5% discount for paying online, and then an additional 10% discount, an on-time discount if you pay up front on time. So that equates to 20%. The retail agreement that we recently entered into, which is, you're right, you're a bit of a pioneer in this space. We've not really had this. We have a long history with the restaurant and bars with that association discount program, but not with retail. And because we don't have a 10% on-time discount on that agreement, it's a 10% discount, meaning 5% for being a member and 5% for paying online. We're just starting this out. For any retail businesses out there that have been contemplating using music, whether it be recorded or live music in order to create an event, at their bricks and mortar store, and to drive traffic and maybe try and create some buzz. Maybe this new agreement is what will allow you to do that. You know, maybe 10% is enough of a discount to make it feasible for you to consider it or cost effective. But I do know that, you know, when you're making the decision to add music, you know, as we just said a minute ago, you do have to take into consideration the potential of having an agreement with other organizations. I will tell you this, Sean, and I said this a minute ago, and it's not something we necessarily have formalized, but, you know, if there's anybody on this telephone that, on this call or listening to in the future that, you know, has an interest in using music but does not want to pay all PROs and is willing to sort of be, you know, specific in what they can play, I mean, I'm certainly open to having that conversation, because I hate to say, no, you need to have you have to have a license with all PROs. But it would probably be a very conservative approach to it, in that, you know, if you were a retail, for example, a retail store or a small restaurant, and you said, you know, I want some music, but I can't pay all 3 PROs. Can you help me? I mean, it's possible we could curate a list of songs, and I could say, look, these are definitely BMI. They, you know, they would probably be from our more our more standard playlist, because I would know that it was safe, that, you know, Chuck Berry wrote this song and Chuck's not moving to ASCAP tomorrow, or Chuck didn't collaborate with an ASCAP songwriter or BMI writer who just switched to ASCAP. So the contemporary stuff it's difficult to curate, but some of the stuff that's been in the BMI catalog for years and years and years, and in many cases, you know, some of the songwriters may no longer be living. It is possible, although we haven't done it on, you know, haven't really done it, to curate something. So I just want to throw that out there, only because I know it can be frustrating from a business perspective to say, I don't want to do business with all 3. I want to do business with just one. But maybe at least talking about this helps you understand the challenges that you'd face or the restrictions that you would have to deal with in going with only 1 PRO.
Dan, if somebody wanted to just send you, and obviously our members know that they can always reach out to SDRA, and we can be an intermediary with those questions, and I appreciate you putting the website up for BMI. If somebody wanted to just send you an email directly, Dan, what is your email address?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I thought I had a slide with that on there. It's very easy. It's D as in Dan Spears, SPEARS, D Spears at BMI.com. I'll even give you my phone number, which is 410-527-1076, 410-527-1076, D Spears at BMI.com. Look, if you want to call and talk about this stuff with me, you know, you don't have to necessarily, you know, tell me your business's name. I'm not, you know, this isn't, as I said at the beginning of this conversation, this isn't a sales pitch. This is just trying to, you know, to educate and help you through this process, which I know can be daunting, and I know that at times frustrating. But I just wanted to help you understand that I'm there in a supportive way, that it would be a safe harbor if you want to call me up and discuss some of these issues, and not worry that you're going to get a call the next day from someone on our sales team. It would be strictly in confidence.
Thanks, Dan. And I think at this point we don't have any further questions. I want to thank you for a fantastic presentation. There is a lot of information. This is something new for SCRA as we venture down this road, and hopefully, again, we can help provide that information to our members. I also do think it's a great benefit of being a member of the Retailers Association that we have this discount program, and as we continue this partnership, hopefully there'll be more opportunities, Dan, to extend this to other portions of our membership that maybe we don't have currently. I would love to. Go ahead.
No, it was a pleasure, and I appreciate the time. I really do, Sean.
Any other closing thoughts that you have, Dan?
No, my only closing thought is that I hope that you'll contact me if you have problems or issues or questions. We have a strong relationship with the association, and Sean and I have been talking about ways that BMI can get more involved, whether it's through financial support or bringing entertainment and songwriters out to the state to help maybe humanize this for you a little bit, because there's nothing more compelling, I think, in the end. And you can listen to me drone on and on and on and maybe get it and sort of understand it. But when I put a songwriter out there and have the songwriter talk a little bit about the impact that the fees have on their career and how it's allowed them to write songs, it's a lot more compelling and certainly a lot more entertaining than listening to me. So maybe someday we'll make that happen. But thank you all for tuning in on a subject matter that may not exactly be the sexiest subject. So I appreciate your time.
Well, we appreciate it as well. I would say we're hoping that we can put something together with DMI in conjunction with our annual meeting next year, and hopefully many of you that are listening to this or will go back and listen later on can attend. This webinar was recorded, and a link to the recording will be emailed out to all of you today. Again, I want to thank Dan for his presentation. Our next webinar is coming up on May 19th. The South Dakota Department of Labor and Regulation will provide information on South Dakota's workers' compensation laws. On June 1st, we'll have a webinar on strategies to reduce shipping expenses. When we send the link to the recording of today's webinar, we'll also include a registration for links to those programs. I want to thank everyone for participating in today's program, and we hope that you all have a great day. Dan, thank you very much.